10. Unlikely hero. At the Payne County Jail in Oklahoma, an unlikely hero saved a guard from almost being murdered by a crazy and hysterical inmate. The whole scene was captured thanks to the security cameras at the jail. The trouble began when a particularly violent inmate abruptly attacked the only officer in the room with a series of lightning-fast punches. The officer tried desperately to regain his composure, but the inmate just kept punching him right in the face. Ouch! The unlikely hero was sitting in a chair and silently watching the assault unfold, looking like he wasn't going to intervene at all. But when things looked like they might turn deadly for the officer, the inmate got up and came to the rescue. The hero inmate was significantly larger than the inmate that was beating up the officer. He literally picked the guy up from behind in a bear hug and flung him to the ground like a sack of potatoes. It took almost no effort for the bigger inmate to put down the attacker, and thanks to his intervention, the officer survived and was able to call for backup. According to Captain Kevin Woodward from the local sheriff's office, the incident only happened in the first place because they don't have enough funds to keep enough correctional officers at the facility. 9. Too hot to handle. 6 inmates were awarded shorter sentences after they came to the rescue and saved the life of one of the guards that was looking after them. A large group of prison inmates in Georgia were doing maintenance work at a local cemetery when the deputy sheriff guarding them suddenly collapsed. It was incredibly hot out that day, and apparently he couldn't handle the heat. He wasn't even attacked by anybody. It was the sun that almost killed him. But what makes this story so incredible is that when the officer lost consciousness and collapsed, the inmates could have easily run away and escaped. They could have taken the cop's gun, they could have driven away in the van. They may have even been able to cross the state line before anyone even took notice. But they didn't. Instead, the 6 men jumped into action and used the guard's cell phone to call 911. While one inmate was on the phone with the officer, another inmate removed the guard's bulletproof vest and tried to cool the officer down. Greg Williams, one of the inmates involved in the rescue, said it wasn't about who was in jail and who wasn't. It was about a man in need of help. Thanks to the brave inmate's quick thinking, the officer was rescued by paramedics and has made a full recovery. In return for their bravery, the sheriff recommended that all 6 inmates get reduced sentences. And in the meantime, the department even threw them in a pizza party. Now that's community service. 8. Jailhouse heart attack. Yet another group of inmates in Georgia saved a prison guard. What is it about Georgia? This time, though, it was during an almost fatal heart attack. The 3 inmates were at the Gwinnett County Jail when Deputy Warren Hobbs began to act a little strange. He suddenly fell to the floor, cracking his head on the concrete. The 3 prisoners were in their cells when they witnessed Warren have his heart attack. They did the only thing they could and raised an enormous ruckus. They started hollering, screaming, and banging as hard as they could on their doors to wake everyone up. Within seconds, the entire cell block was making noise. They made enough noise that the deputy rose from his heart attack stupor and hit the button that opened the cell doors. 3 of the inmates ran out and began performing what little first aid they could. One of the inmates even grabbed the deputy's phone and called for help. He ended up being rushed to the hospital and later fully recovered at home. We are deeply appreciative to these 3 inmates for the courage, determination, and kindness they displayed when they came to the rescue of our deputy, said the Gwinnett County Sheriff's Office. This just goes to show that just because you've made some bad choices that landed you behind bars doesn't necessarily mean you're an awful person all around. 7. Rikers Island Rumble. At Rikers Island, a brave group of inmates rescued a female corrections officer who was almost brutalized by a huge prisoner when they were locked inside of a vestibule together. An inmate had managed to slip inside an area that was supposed to be protected. The area was called A Station. He got through by slipping through a crack in the wall and then opening the security door. Inside the secured area was the female correction officer. It was just the 2 of them alone, with the inmate being a whopping 5'9", 1.7 meters, and weighing nearly 300 pounds, 136 kilograms. He immediately pulled down his pants and launched himself right on top of the surprised lady officer. Luckily for the correction deputy, a group of inmates saw what was happening and ran to her rescue. With brute force, they ripped apart the plexiglass, separating them from the vestibule, then rushed inside and took down the inmate who was trying to force himself onto the guard. With the inmates in control, they kept the naughty inmate down until help could arrive. If not for them, things may have turned out very differently for the officer. What do you think should happen to the inmate that attacked? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section below, and if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. 6. Prison break. In the state of Texas, a group of inmates broke out of their cells to save the life of a correction officer. Video footage of the amazing incident was recently released by the Park County Sheriff's Office. The inmates were being held in a minimum security holding room beneath the district court building. As they were waiting to be moved, the officer watching them suddenly slumped forward in his chair and grew unresponsive. At first, the inmates didn't really know what to do. They looked at the unresponsive guard through their holding cells, debating how they could help him. Finally, the inmates worked together to break open the cell door and run into the holding area, where they proceeded to check on the officer and bang on the doors for help. They shook him, trying to wake him up, but he had no pulse and wasn't breathing. One of the inmates grabbed his radio and called for assistance. In just minutes, other officers in the building realized something was terribly wrong and quickly called for the paramedics. The officer was resurrected with a defibrillator and stabilized, and all thanks to the kindness of the criminals. The officer that went unconscious said he absolutely credits the inmates with saving his life, especially considering it all happened in such a short amount of time. The inmates were then locked back into the cell with a thank you and no additional charges for escaping. They will still be processed for their previous offenses, which included drug charges and assault. 5. Alabama scissor attack. In Alabama, a female inmate who managed to get her hands on a pair of scissors has been charged with attempted murder. The charge may have been first-degree murder if not for 4 other inmates who intervened during the brutal attack at the Marshall County Jail. It all went down when Officer Melissa Woodall was escorting Emily Sledge from a holding cell to the main women's block so she could use the toilet. As they passed through a work cubicle on the way to the bathroom, Emily picked up a pair of scissors that she sneakily scavenged from one of the desks and then started stabbing the officer. But just as the officer was being stabbed, she managed to open the cell block door. Other inmates came streaming out of the cell block, and despite the fact that Emily was brandishing a bloody pair of scissors, they took the murderous girl down. In the end, the officer was taken to the hospital and treated for a stab wound in the arm and 4 stab wounds to the head. She is extremely lucky to still be alive, and her attacker will now be spending, presumably, the rest of her life behind bars. Did she really think she was going to get away with it? What do you think was her reasoning for stabbing the guard? 4. A reduced sentence. 31-year-old Antonio Dwayne Brown was sentenced to spend between 1.5 to 5 years imprisoned in Kent County, Michigan, after being charged with fleeing and eluding a police officer. Hours after Brown was sentenced, he saved the life of a female guard, turning things around for himself. The female guard was unlocking the prison system to let out another inmate who was being held with Brown. The other inmate was Willie Williams, who had requested to grab a roll of toilet paper. He was supposed to return to his cell after grabbing the roll, but instead he snuck behind a pillar and then attacked the female guard when she walked by. Williams knocked the radio out of the woman's hand, began beating her, and then got on top of her and started to choke her. But as he was attacking the guard, he accidentally touched a button on the wall that opened up the other cells in the area. That was when Antonio Brown charged the attacker and pulled Williams off the woman, just seconds before she would have been strangled to death. After everything calmed down, the judge called Brown back into the courtroom and gave him a greatly reduced sentence, awarding him for his good deed. Good job, Antonio. 3. Strangled with a towel. In Falkenburg Road Jail in Florida, the inmates will use just about anything as a weapon. One particularly creative prisoner recently tried to strangle a guard to death with a towel in a completely unprovoked attack. The attack was perpetrated by Andre Zachary, only 22 years old, who was serving a sentence for burglary. As Deputy D. Hernandez walked by, Keandre did a sneak attack from behind with a towel and tried to suffocate him. Luckily, the other inmates weren't quite so savage. They quickly ran to the aid of the guard and wrestled Keandre off him, managing to save the guard's life. After the incident, the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office praised the inmates for their good behavior and said the rescue was due to the professionalism and mutual respect between the inmates and the guards. If the guards weren't so civil with the inmates, chances are they may not have intervened at all. The guard was okay, besides the neck abrasions and a twisted ankle. 2. Free pizza. 3 inmates were given free pizza after they saved the life of a detention officer from a brutal attack in North Carolina. As with many of the other attacks we talked about today, this one seemed completely unprovoked. As the detention officer walked through the cell block, an inmate named Daniel Bledsoe shoved him to the ground and started choking him. Immediately, without any thought of hesitation, 3 inmates jumped up and saved the officer from the attack. For their bravery, they were given pizza. As for the attacker, he already had a previous assault charge pending in an unrelated attack on a different detention officer. After this second incident, chances are he's going to be locked up a whole lot tighter. 1. Saved from a stroke. A group of inmates serving time at a Georgia jail have been praised as heroes after saving the life of Deputy Patrick Edmond, who nearly died from a stroke. The deputy had been conducting a cell search when some of the men noticed he was acting a little odd. His eyes were fuzzy, he wasn't behaving quite right, and he was mumbling the same phrase over and over again. Finally, he dropped a blanket that he'd been holding, staggered, and then nearly toppled over. One of the inmates grabbed him and helped him sit down in a chair, while the other inmates ran to the unit phone and called for help. As it turned out, the deputy was having a massive stroke. After medical personnel arrived and sent him to the hospital, he passed a blood clot in his brain. Luckily, doctors saved his life and sent him home to recover. But if it hadn't been for the help and quick thinking of the inmates, the stroke may have killed him right there in the prison. Thanks for watching. What do you think of these shocking stories of jail heroism? Let us know in the comments down below, and be sure to hit the subscribe button and come back again for more videos like these. See you next time. Bye.